started.
Right.
Awesome.
We have a small local audience, but we have a big Zoom audience. So I think this will go great. Thanks everybody here for coming in person. We appreciate that.
Yes, and thank you to our colleagues in the English department, in American Studies, and in Women, Gender, and Sexuality for co-sponsoring this as well. We would like to welcome officially Dr. Kishonna Gray to come talk to you. Dr. Gray is the author of Intersectional Tech, Black Users in Digital Gaming, and she is the Associate Professor of Writing, Rhetoric, and Digital Studies at the University of Kentucky. She previously served as the Martin Luther King Scholar and visiting professor at MIT. Her work is grounded in critical race theory and feminist approaches to knowledge production. She interrogates the impact that technology has on the culture and how Black users in particular influence the creation of technological products and the dissemination of digital archives. We are incredibly happy to have her with us today. Intersectional Tech has been one of my favorite books I've read this year. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you all. And I'm looking very much forward to all of this. So have we given Dr. Gray her share screen?
Just whenever it happens, I can start talking, and if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Listen, the show doesn't stop if technology fails. I could care less, because I've got plenty of things to say. I'm excited to be here. So give me a sense, like about the audience. Are we undergraduate students? Is this a class? Tell me about like some of the things that you all do in your center there.
So the audience is a mix. These are mostly undergraduates. Sean and I teach a few classes that deal with games or gaming technology or representations in game. We teach a 305, which is a digital humanities class. A 306, I think some students are here that are about narrative and representation in video games. And I'm currently teaching 307, which is about computing and gaming technology from a cultural standpoint, access issues and all sorts of that. So we've invited all of them. A lot of them have come on Zoom. We've also invited our other classes, our survey classes, our California history classes, our Los Angeles history classes, our urban classes. And students, I must say, and ourselves in particular, have been really excited. We've been talking about it a lot this semester. They've read some of your work. I know in my class, I believe in Sean's class also. For sure. And we've had a lot of just general interest and excitement for this. So we're really excited to have you. And of course, we'll have you back, especially if you come to our center where we have games going back to the 70s and computers and consoles. And we'd love to play some games with you.
I would love that. I would love that too. So just have me back, and hopefully, everybody, who's here will come back and also hang out with me. And then I'll bring some books and sign some books and everything too. So I'm so excited to be here. I loved, especially when I heard, about like the history of like, LA, when I learned that history is, hella Black, hella brown, and I love it so much. I remember watching like this documentary because my heart is in California. I don't know, like, I just feel like, I'm supposed to, it's too expensive. It's so expensive to live. Y'all know this. I'm not telling y'all nothing y'all don't know, but I want to be in California, but nobody will hire me and give me like a job out there. And I don't want to live. I got 2 kids, so they need space. Anyway, that's not what I'm talking about here. So if y'all want to give me a job, go ahead and give me a job. I'll come on out there. But I love the work that I do. And I love seeing, y'all been in this space for a while. Just think about, just the growth of gaming, game studies, gaming programs, gaming centers, like spaces like, that y'all have there, like were unheard of, like a decade ago, right? So it's really beautiful just to see more students like engaging in here, and even a room of this size, like we almost got 100 folks out here, that are interested, in these kinds of topics. Like that's like huge. And I think one of the things that I focus on a lot these days is just trying to get people to realize how significant gaming is. Because those of us who are in the space, we know how dynamic these spaces are, but it's really hard to get like other folks, especially in academic settings, to like pay attention, to why it's important. I know this is not the space. If I were there, we would have had a meeting. I would love to have, hear the conversations about how you all convinced, the upper admins to give you space and to support y'all. Cause, I'm really fascinated in what we have to say, the magic we have to perform in order to get, the provost to say, yeah, we'll do this game and stuff. Cause most of them do not. I want to make sure I can share some. Yep, I can share. Thank you all so much. I've got some slides here, and a lot of times I just like to freestyle too, but I'll share some slides because I'm big about origin stories. How about while I'm talking, I have to make the chat interactive, like it's like a Twitch. So I would love to hear y'all's, and while I'm talking in the comments, share like the first game that you ever played. And also you can put like what platform it's on. I love to see folks' origin stories. What was your introduction to gaming? And the folks in the room, I'm sorry, I guess you don't have space to like comment, but I'll make sure we get to y'all, and we'll talk to y'all here in a second. Let me share the slide so we can get the transcripts up there as well to make sure that things are accessible for folks. Let me start the show. So that's me. That's some of the books that I've written. Intersectional Tech. I think a lot of what I talk about now is really based off of a lot of the work from Intersectional Tech. Now, I love Intersectional Tech. I love everything that I write. I really love that book because it gave me some space to talk methods, right? That book's doing a whole lot, but I think I needed to, I had to address, I feel like the elephant in the academic room, and thinking about how limited methods are for studying a lot of what we do, right? So I am an undisciplined scholar. I mean that in all the ways that I could say that. I don't have a disciplinary home, right? So my background, my goodness, okay, my background is criminal justice, but I was one of those first generation kids. I didn't know what it meant, to go to college, like declaring a major. I had no idea. So I thought I was smart. I thought I was gonna do like the pre-med route, and I was gonna do like physical therapy. I failed all them classes. I failed anatomy, physiology, biomechanics. I got like 4 or 5 F's on my transcript right now. And I was like, okay, all right, clearly this is not for me. So I gotta switch it up. But by the time I was gonna change my major, it was like junior year. And I had to hurry up and like get out. So I had failed those classes. I had to pick a major that was just gonna let me quickly get out of there, right? So I picked criminal justice. Now, in my mind, my first generation self, y'all can relate to this. I was like, okay, when I'm done with college, I'm gonna have a whole degree. But in my mind, I was either gonna go home and work at the jail, because rural Kentucky, I'm from Kentucky, rural Kentucky. We got jails and we got Walmart. So I was like, I'm just gonna get this degree. I'm gonna go, because I didn't know what else to do with that degree. Like imagine that, because a lot of us, we don't have social capital. We don't know none of this stuff, right? But that was the extent of my thinking in my mind. I'm gonna get this degree. I'm about to go be the warden or something. That was my mind. Forgive me. But whenever I was my senior year, I was taking these classes in criminal justice because those were the classes that were going to allow me to quickly get through my degree. And I had a mentor and advisor. One of my teachers was like, Kishonna, you write pretty well. You know that? I was like, I do. I had never had anybody tell me that, right? And I know as a mentor too, especially as a mentor, especially for like students of color, like Black and brown folks, we don't often hear that we're good at something a lot, right? And so I made it like a point of mine to always say, like, you're good at that, you're good at this, you're good, like to hype people up, because we don't hear it a lot. But when he told me that, I was like, I didn't believe him because nobody had ever told me that before. But anyway, I'm gonna try and make this long story short. So I went to graduate school. I went to the master's program. It was still criminology. But that year that happened, it was August of 2005. Oh my gosh, was y'all even alive in 2005? Oh my, don't tell me. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. You were alive, Luke. Thank you, Luke. Thank you for telling me you was alive in 2005. So August of 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit. Now I know a lot of you all are too young to remember this. There were no TikToks at the time. There was really we didn't call social media, like we didn't call it that at the time. Facebook existed, MySpace existed. We still have Black Planet, Mi Gente, Asian Avenue. We had like a lot of those, kind of cultural niche sites, right? Because Facebook wasn't cool. Wasn't nobody going to Facebook. That was like for the rich college kids, So a lot of us was like we were like in Black Planet and MySpace, right? But anyway, Hurricane Katrina happened. And I was fascinated with two things. I was fascinated with the mediated narratives. So that got me more interested in media and conversations around like media and communication. And I was also interested in how people were using comment sections. So Yahoo News, that's how we got news. I don't think Google was around. I swear it may have been. We didn't use Google then. But anyway, Yahoo was like our go-to. I know y'all are like, oh my gosh, y'all were old and out of the loop. And so Yahoo News was our go-to. And so when we would look at Yahoo News, the comment section, people would like comment and share stories about them being displaced from the Gulf region to Texas, Houston, Illinois, people got, I remember actually there was some Black folks that used the word. They said we're getting deported, being forced out. And it was interesting. It was interesting language that was used, especially around forced migration, movement of bodies, forced movement of like people. It was really interesting conversations. But anyway, how people use like the social media at the time, talking about their stories on MySpace, talking about their stories in Black Planet. I got fascinated. I got interested in that. So that's what my focus was. I promise I'm gonna get to gaming. I know it's a long story. I'm getting to gaming. I promise. So then I took that project into my PhD program. And so PhD, Arizona State, Southwest, it was hot. Oh, the desert's hot. I'd never been so hot in my life, my God. But I loved it. It was the most beautiful place. I love the desert. My heart's in the West Coast. Like I fell in love with the West. It became really intense to do this research and to do this work around Hurricane Katrina, around what happened, to poor folks that were displaced from the Gulf region. It became really intense and really heavy to do that work. And there was never a chapter in the methods book, or there was never any, there was never a journal article about how to deal with the emotional heaviness of researching, topics like that, especially when you're a part of the population, right? There was no textbook that prepared us for that. So that was like one glaring omission, from a methods book. But also the treatment of people as data never sat right with me, right? How I had to reduce people's stories and their narratives, and I had to quantify them, and this was also, especially coming from criminology, it's a very, quant heavy. And when I say that, my bad, in case for students who haven't had methods classes yet, there are like kind of like two main. It's like the Republicans and the Democrats of research methods. We got qualitative, we got quantitative, and they battle and they fight all the time. They shouldn't be competing, because I think they really complement, each other. I think they're both necessary, but there are some fields and some disciplines that'll say that the one's more valuable than the other. I'm not a part of that camp. But I also realized that my strength was in the qualitative part. I liked interviewing people. I like talking to people. I like doing focus groups. I like for people to narrate their experiences. And I wasn't good at statistics. I wasn't good at math. I wasn't good at science. I learned that early. So I failed all them stats classes. Listen, I got so many F's on my transcripts. It's a wonder I got a damn PhD today, but I do. I'm out here. We out here, y'all. Don't give up. Don't quit. So I found there was something so incongruent whenever I learned methods that didn't really fit me. And so intersectional tech, what it kind of did was kind of filled in the gaps that I felt like I had of like, how do we, because there was one example in the book, especially if anybody's ever read it, Tyrell, a person who was allowed me into his world. He was sharing a let me stop so I can just see everybody too. I'll reshare that in a second. He shared a story with me about they were doing the VR experience in the mall. So for those of us who hang out in malls, for any given amount of time, you all know, Microsoft will have something set up like with gaming or whatever, but the VR had just come out. And he was there, him and a group of his friends, Black and brown boys, men, young folks. And the police started like harassing them. And when he was telling me this story, now a couple things were taken over, right? So of course, me as a Black person, hearing what they had to go through, like with the police, I was immediately enraged. I was angry, right? But then also I'm in researcher mode, I'm like, oh, I should ask questions. I should, I want to understand more what, and I was like, Kishonna, stop. he just experienced, a significant amount of violence, at the mall when he's trying to play. I'm like, don't be asking him questions like that. But I remember like one of my research mentors was like, you should have asked some questions while the experience was fresh. And I'm like, what do you mean while it was fresh? So those are, the kinds of things that we're urged to do, like in graduate school. A lot of you, especially if you go that way, is for those of you who are in graduate school, you'll probably, experience like a lot of this. A lot of the stuff is just like incongruent with how, what your lived experiences are. So, but I realized that I was like, the Academy doesn't really care. Also the famous words of Kanye West, Bush doesn't care about Black people. Y'all don't remember that. That's when Kanye was cool. We used to like Kanye West. We used to like him. Back when we liked him, he made the comment, like Bush doesn't care about Black people. And so I was like, you saw that in so many things, in so many ways. Like we didn't have TikTok to share this information, saying what he said there was like a radical act, right? And it was radical, in all the spaces, including academia. So whenever I was going into this space, I wanted to learn more about, Black lives, and their experiences like with natural disasters, but I transitioned to learn about, marginalized and minoritized lives like in digital spaces. There was just not a template to do this work. And now, we have books. We have so many scholars, we got so many books, we know all these things, but it was really hard in these streets, trying to do this work around like 2008, 2009, trying to say, these things matter in these spaces and trying to get people to care about gaming. People still don't care about gaming, trying to get people to care about social media and like the power of these platforms and the things that they can afford. It was really, tough out here. Yes, with Mike Myers. Yes, somebody remembers that. Somebody remembers that. Okay, let me go. Let me go here because I'll just be on a soapbox here. Let me go. Let's see. Oh, Gaming by Another Name. There's a book, a really popular book in Black studies so I got this name from that book, and that book was called Slavery by Another Name. So it started talking about, once, like enslaved populations were freed, and then what institutions then took over to replicate the system of slavery. So that's what I borrow, this name from Gaming by Another Name, because I really, going back to the origin stories, I really wanted to talk about, how I got into the space and what things were so influential to me, to propel like this work that I did. So the year, let's see, BCFX, the Black College Football Experience. The year's 2009. And I was learning a lot more about like New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina, and I came across, this game by a company based out of New Orleans, Energize. And I played it, and I was already a gamer. So I would go to gaming because gaming was like my safe haven, my go-to. Whenever I would see all these images, related to Hurricane Katrina and that at this time, a couple years later, seeing how people were displaced, people were not returning back to New Orleans. Folks were making comments saying, oh, we finally cleaned up, public housing in New Orleans. We couldn't do it, but God did. So there was just awful rhetoric and discourse, around what was happening. And that became really intense. So gaming was my go-to. And I didn't know that, my go-to would eventually become my career too. But I remember playing this game and I thought it was the most beautiful game that I had ever seen in my life. Now, and if you go back to 2009, there are popular games, sports games like on the market, right? FIFA's popping, Madness popping, 2K is popping. So all these games are already out there. NCAA, I think it was before, they had to shut down, for, the student athletes that were talking about their likeness in the games, talking about, paying players, for using their likeness like in these games. But we had NCAA football, the football game as well. But I was really excited about this game because NCAA, the football game, it never featured HBCUs or, historically Black colleges or universities. It didn't feature HSIs, Hispanic serving institutions. It didn't feature, a lot of the sports teams like from the spaces that a lot of us know and we're in close proximity to. So what I loved about BCFX was that it put, Black collegiate culture just on full display. And what it also did was it archived, it gave us like a sort of like a museum inside this game of where we got, a sense of, Black collegiate history, Black sports history. But what this game also did, if anybody's ever spending time like in HBCUs or on campuses, nobody cares about football because their teams really aren't that great. Now, I know you all know Deion Sanders and Jackson State, and you think all HBCUs are great. That's just not the case, right? It's not the case. That's okay. We love them still. We can love them. The teams just aren't that great. But what this game did, it gave us this halftime show. Now, if you've ever been at HBCU, you know, you're not going for football, you're going for the band. You're going to see the drum line. You know, that's what you're going to see. And the game gave us that, like in a halftime show. Now, the critics destroyed this game. The critics were like, the game's ugly. I felt that was racist, but you know, they said the game was ugly. The graphics weren't great. But even if you go and look back, y'all should look up, you know, y'all got devices in your hands right now. Go and look up, you know, some of the playthrough of BCFX. I think it's a really cool, like really dope game. And I really appreciate y'all's generations too, because y'all value, you know, retro looking kind of stuff. Y'all don't mind the pixelated stuff. And I think that's cool. I'm really glad that's coming back. So that's like, that was one game that, you know, was part of my origin story. A couple more before I even shifted, you know, really to go into gaming, you know, heavy. I played this game. This is Dead Island, zombie genre. Oh goodness, where do I start? The woman on the screen, her name is Perna Jackson. Perna Jackson, she's one of the playable characters. Now, this is the first time that I have ever played a woman of color. So before, I think the only other woman that we played as the protagonist, as the hero, was Lara Croft. Now, hopefully you all know, Lara Croft was supposed to be Lara Cruz. Lara Cruz was supposed to be a South American explorer who was reclaiming stolen goods from the British Empire and bringing them back home. So it was a really beautiful South American, like indigenous story. But when the game was about to come out, when they saw the narrative, they saw the story, they were like, no, y'all gotta whiten that up. Ain't no way we allowing this brown woman to lead a franchise like that, right? But just imagine how amazing that could have been if we had Lara Cruz. No shade to Lara Croft. We love Lara Croft too. You know, we stand. We were all huge fans of Lara Croft. We love Lara Croft. But the fact that they had to whitewash her character to appeal to a mainstream audience was very, very significant. So this was, you know, there was a lot more of that happening, and hopefully I have a few more examples of where you can see where, you know, where the game developers and designers, they, at the core of them, they wanted to create diverse narratives and stories, but at the top, you know, the people who were selling the stories, they were like, no, we're gonna keep it white and we're gonna keep it moving. So I was shocked when we got Perna Jackson, because this is the first time that I ever played like a darker skinned woman of color, right? So if y'all, what y'all need to do right now, go to Google, look, because I don't think I put that other image up there. I didn't. Look up Perna Jackson. So if you look at Perna Jackson, you're going to see the marketing materials for Perna Jackson. And if you notice, they've done some things to her. Perna Jackson's a dark skinned, beautiful woman, but in the marketing materials, they lightened her skin. They gave her more European features. You know, they made her nose thinner. You know, they made her, they Europeanized, anglicized, whatever it is. They wasped up her face. Y'all don't know what wasp is. They're probably, what's wasp? That's okay. Go Google it. But you know, they whitened her up for you know, the mainstream audience when they were marketing her. Not only that, the other thing that was very concerning about this is that, you know, for those of us who are gamers in the room, I love when I'm in a room with gamers because y'all know what I mean with a lot of this stuff. I don't have to stop. But if I do need to stop and say anything, please let me know. I'll make sure to look at the chat here in a second. But everybody knows for most games like this, zombie genre, you know, you can build up your meter and you have like a special ability, you know, your alt ability, you LBRB, and then you just destroying everybody, or you got a big bang or something, right? So Perna Jackson had one, right? Now, we wouldn't have known this just playing the game. This is some information that we learned later after the game had come out. So there was this really amazing white dude who worked at GameStop, and he was like, you all know, like the website GitHub, you know, where people share codes and, you know, share programming language like with one another. Well, we didn't really have that at the time. So, you know, just those tech nerdy folks, you know, just, you know, who were able to, you know, get behind the game and look at the code and look at the programming, then they would just share it like on forums and blogs or whatever, you know, because geeks like stuff like that. You know, there's some nerds in the room. I know y'all like stuff like that. So basically what this white dude found, he was like, y'all got to take a look at this. Look, why did they do this to this Black woman? That's what he said in that little article that he wrote. They called her special ability. They called it feminist whore. And in his mind, he was like, what's the purpose and what's the point in that, right? To call her special ability feminist whore. Now we can Monday morning quarterback this thing and look back. So, which is what I did, you know, because I didn't learn about this until like some years later. But the time that I learned about it, we were already in the thick of something called Gamergate. And you may or may not remember Gamergate. It may have been a little bit, y'all might be a little too young for that. But basically Gamergate was a harassment campaign against women and diverse bodies in gaming spaces. It's like, these minoritized people came along and they were invading our spaces. And you're like, no, these games are mine. Get away, get out of here, women. Get out of here, you coloreds. We don't want you here. It's really like that, like some Jim Crow shit. My bad. Jim Crow stuff. It was real wild, right? And so basically, there were, and then they tried to act like it wasn't really that. They tried to say, well, we're caring about, games journalism and we want more ethics behind games journalism. Those are lies. That's not what they were actually meaning. But anyway, what we remember, I think most of us will pinpoint like August 2014 as like the moment that propelled Gamergate. And I think that was the moment where there was some harassment against like Anita Sarkeesian, Brianna Wu, Zoe Quinn, there was a couple folks who were like the focal point for that. Now this was August 2014. Now, if that date is significant to you in any way, it's probably because you remember it also as the date that Ferguson police shot and killed Mike Brown. And so a lot of these things were actually in tandem with one another, right? So the rise of Gamergate and really the reemergence and the movements for Black Lives, were happening alongside one another. So these are some really interesting times because for a lot of us, we really couldn't pay attention to the gaming space, because we were like, well, we're just trying to live, right? We just want to stay alive. But I think what was happening behind the scenes in gaming is that there were these folks were urging for more diversity before there were public conversations around diversity. And so I feel like that, whoever told this game developer that he had to create this Black woman, he probably didn't want to. He probably had ideas of other things that he wanted to create. And he probably meant no shade towards this character, as a Black woman. He was probably just mad and in his feelings. And he was probably like, oh, this feminist whore, why do I have to do this? Like, that's probably the extent of his thinking. But I think that it was also like a microcosm of the larger energy and the larger vibes in gaming spaces during that time, of where, there were, it's like just this myth of scarcity of like, we don't have that many, and we don't want to share with you, so there were all these calls, to diversify games, to give, to have more women. Assassin's Creed, you all remember when folks, y'all probably, especially Assassin's Creed fans, you all remember when we were like, okay, Assassin's Creed, give us like, like a woman-like character. And then they said, no, we can't because women are too hard to animate. And basically that's what they said. And we were like, how are you going to create these vast worlds? You can recreate the entire world. That camel over there, I can see the hair on that camel's back. You're riding these horses. I can jump from the top of the Empire State Building into some hay on the ground, but you can't make a woman? Come on now. Like, so there was a lot of frustrations. There was a whole lot of frustrations, during this time. And I think that Gamergate was just one of those things where it was just like a tip of an iceberg when there's like there's a whole bunch of other stuff underneath it, right? So that was also part of the thing that moved me into this space. The other one, I think these are out of order. This one should have come right before, the Perna Jackson one, because I think this is Walking Dead. For those of you who played Walking Dead, beautiful game. So when I was telling people that I needed examples of games, like now we just take this for granted. I think we've got like a lot of diversity in games now, which is a good thing. But during that time, like 2010, 2011, we didn't have that many, right? And I think this is also the reason why, so a lot of my work is not in the gaming space. So my core research is not focusing on like representations in games, but it wasn't that because I couldn't find enough to write about and talk about. So that's really why I shifted to be like, well, I want to know what gamers are talking about in these spaces. Xbox had just went live, PlayStation had just recently, went live, got their network or whatever. And so I wanted to, and there was already a lot of research on PC. Folks were doing research on World of Warcraft, EverQuest, like a few other games that were pretty popular at the time, and people were writing about those spaces. But whenever I was looking at those publications and those articles, I kept looking for me, And what I mean by that is like it never was anything written from a perspective of my lens through which I view the world, right? And I think it was Toni Morrison that said, or you write the book you want to read. Like I took that to heart. Like I was like, she's talking to me. Like she means this. But I remember, let me tell you about Lee Everett, and then I'll jump into that story. So I remember I was asking, I was talking in the forums because we still weren't using social media in the way that we use today. Twitter was young, but Twitter was like one of those spaces where like nobody's going there. We're hanging out in Facebook because Facebook is cool. My gosh, I can't believe we actually said that. But anyway, so nobody was going to Twitter, but also we didn't post on these social media sites in a way. Like if you're, hey, I'm looking for resources on so-and-so, anybody can help. You know how, like the crowdsourcing of like information on social media, it's really beautiful, that we have that now. But back then, I had to just go to the forums, the Xbox Live forums. So I was asking people for different examples of, folks of color that are playable, and that have like a narrative behind them. There was a time also Street Fighter has like representation. I can't say it's beautiful representation because anytime I am one of those people that even if you feature, like Black and brown folks as like drug dealers and criminals, and if we're the help or we're the sidekick or we're buffoons and coons, listen, the presence of us, listen, all Black and brownness is beautiful to me, right? My question is, let's get more, because there's, we all got that drug dealing uncle, we all got, y'all know T.O. been to jail a couple times and stuff. We all got that. So let's not act like that GTA was not a story that we didn't know. We know GTA. Those are our neighborhoods, those are our barrios and our hoods and stuff. But we want more because we're that, but we're also more. But Hollywood and mediated, media would never give us like more of what we know, that's there. But also, our drug dealing uncles were really beautiful human beings. There are singers and songwriters and creators and painters and cooks and chefs and caretakers of our community and raisers of children, and then those are the stories that aren't out there. And then people didn't know that. So I think that's where whenever we ask for like more diversity, we're more than just these tropes and these stereotypes that you're constantly putting us in. We're not denying that is like a part or an aspect of who we are, but just give us some more. So I remember asking folks, I was like, I need examples of, folks of color in these games. It wasn't that many. I remember people sending over Street Fighter. I wanted to give you the example of Street Fighter. So Street Fighter is beautiful. It's not that narrative heavy because it's one of those fighting games or whatever. My kid's in front of me doing my hands every time I give talks. He's, get on somewhere. Stop making fun of me. So Street Fighter was really cool because we got like Black characters, we got brown, we got South Asian representation. But of course, when the folks of color are featured, they're done in stereotypical ways, right? Dalsim from India, he's like this magical whisperer. There's a snake that comes out, there's Blanca from Brazil, he's like a beastly character. We don't even, humanize Blanca, right? And I think that's indicative of like conversations that we have of the global South anyway. We don't humanize, experiences and lives like in the global South. So these games really are like this reflection of like this us versus them, us Western. And when I say, and let me not say Western, because I think what has happened is really like the United States and like East Asian countries have really like aligned, to be like, this is us. And then all the others, that includes like the global South, that includes, the South Asian, that includes, Middle Eastern, so there was really like some alignment, with these major powerhouse gaming companies, from the United States, from Europe, and from East Asia. So there was a time where, we would see the representations that were very problematic, when it came time to represent folks of color. And so then I got this example. Folks sent this to me. They said, Kishonna, we know that you're looking for diverse representation. We got this really amazing game called, Walking Dead, Telltale's Walking Dead. And Lee Everett is really this complex character. You're going to love him. And so I was like, okay, cool. I was really excited because I didn't really have that many representations of Black or brown masculinity at the time, right? And so, should I get mad at this part? So I turned the game on. The opening scene. This is the opening scene. This. And I called my friend, because this is somebody that I knew. It wasn't a recommendation from the forums. It was a friend that I knew. I was like, why did you send me this game? They're like, what do you mean, Kishonna? I was like, why would you think I wanted to see a Black man in the back of a police cruiser being subject to the surveillance state, being subject to the criminal justice apparatus? Why would you think that I wanted to see that? And why would you think this is an example of something I'm looking for? He was like, Kishonna, what are you talking about? He was really confused. I was like, the opening scene, like I'm sitting here looking at Lee Everett, the main character. I didn't know his name at the time. I'm looking at this Black man who you say is the main character, and he's been arrested. He's in the car. And he said, he dismissed it. He was like, oh, Kishonna, just keep playing. That has nothing to do with the rest of the game. I was even more baffled and confused. And I'm like, why? Then why would they depict this man in this scene under these kinds of conditions? It still was beyond me. And he said, well, Kishonna, he gave me another line, and I got even more mad. He was like, Kishonna, he's actually a history professor at the University of Georgia. He said that like that was supposed to make me feel better about what I was seeing on my screen. I was even more enraged because I'm like, why didn't you take me to the lecture hall of the University of Georgia and give me like a flashback of him, presenting and lecturing or talking about, like the history of Georgia or the Civil War or something? Why did the game do this? He was like, Kishonna, you're making a big deal of nothing. That you just keep playing the game. Lee Everett's really amazing. I never got that far because in that moment, I refused to play this game. I've played it. I watched playthroughs. I didn't play it, but I've watched playthroughs. And so I see that, Lee Everett is a complex human. He's a father figure. He does caretaking. So he has a really beautiful story. But this really bothered me, and I was like, why? What's the purpose of this? And to me, I had to, because the company didn't fill in the blanks, I had to fill in the blanks for myself. So I'm like, apparently you're trying to authenticate this Black experience because there was no other reason why you would depict this scene in this way. If you weren't trying to say, yeah, let's really show you how Black this guy is. It was ridiculous. Oh, this is a beautiful experience here. I want to shift to more recent examples because Battlefield 1 is a game that just came out like in 2016. Do y'all have access to push that QR code? I want to make sure that things aren't in the way and that you can access that QR code. So that's going to take you to, thank you, Luke. That's going to take you to a YouTube video, Kotaku. It should be a Kotaku video where it's the opening scene of this game that features the Harlem Hellfighters. Now, I loved this so much. We were very excited about this, right? Because I think first it was the first time that a military regiment was like featured or depicted in a game. And a lot of us at that time, we played a lot of military shooters, we played shooters, the military industrial complex is just huge in games, right? So we play this, we engage in this game. But it was also, the first time that, we saw Black and brown folks depicted. So I had to do like a little background, because I didn't know much about the Harlem Hellfighters, but I knew that they were amazing and dope, right? So basically the Harlem Hellfighters were these Black and Puerto Rican, men who fought in World War I. They had a lot of success in France, whatever military success means. It's not real. You know what I mean? It's terrible. It's all terrible. It's all bad. But, they won some battles, over there. But when they were... If you see the opening scenes, I wish I could play it. It's such a long video. We really could have just did the entire lecture on that video. But as you're playing this game, remember this game came out in 2016. So keep in mind the time and context in which you're in. We are still in the midst of movement for Black lives. Folks are still getting shot. It's hashtag Black death everywhere, right? Keep that in mind. So as you're playing this game, you get some messages like in the beginning of the game, and the game tells us that you're not going to survive. So for those of us who play shooters, I think I saw a few folks in there, I saw some Apex in there, we don't really take that serious, because we die all the time in shooters, right? But this game really meant it. So as you're playing this game, when we were playing, I felt that the game was trying to unalive me. It was hard for my health to generate when I got hit. When I would, like you would hide and you would come out and shoot some or whatever. Like folks just had like instant, like auto aim, and then we were getting shot immediately, right? And then ultimately, our health doesn't regenerate, and then it leads to our demise, right? And so when we die, like the first time that we died, on the screen pops up this memorial of I think so, like Willie Jefferson, 1885, 1915, right? So it gave like this memoriam of his, when he was born and when he died, right there on the battlefield. And that was a very moving, like, kind of experience. I said, oh my gosh, like I said, look at how beautiful this is. Like, shout outs to this game for doing that, right? So we spawned quickly, like as I'm trying to have this emotional moment and this connection, that fades away, and the camera kind of pans to another point on the battlefield, and I have to start shooting again. And in my mind, like, it took me a few seconds to just be like, okay, I'm gonna start shooting again. I didn't know if I was the same dude or somebody else, but we know we just spawn back and we just keep shooting, right? For those of us who play shooters, that's just what we do. We don't question much after that. So the same thing was happening. Health going down, can't regenerate, we die. Adolphus Washington, 1900, died 1918, right? Whatever the years are. And so at this moment, I'm like, are these real people? Like, or is this just like video game stuff? So I pinned that to look that up, to actually look up who these folks were. And then, the camera pans again, and I'm going to like another spot on the battlefield. Same thing happens. Pan again. I go to somewhere. I'm like, wow, it became too much. What started as a beautiful experience quickly devolved into an overconsumption of Black death. The hypervisibility of these Black men in this space and this Black death was just too much at the time. Because remember, I gave you the context of which this game was released. There was so much hashtag Black death around us at this point. I couldn't understand why they thought this game in this moment was going to be the jam, because it wasn't. It wasn't. Because what we were experiencing was just like the video of Tamir Rice, of Philando Castile, of any number of folks whose deaths we've seen. It was the last moments of their life. And to me, that I'm like, what? I couldn't understand what they were trying to honor. I couldn't understand what they were trying to honor. I'm gonna go on. So watch that video later, when you get a chance. But a lot of my work, I gave you all those examples, but a lot of my work was really using gaming to help make sense of physical realities, right? There was a quote. Let me go back to this quote back here. This is one of the quotes that really started to drive my work around that time. And I say in this, I say here, space is not just a passive backdrop to human behavior and social action, but it's constantly produced and remade within complex relations of culture, power, and difference. Let me read that again. Space is not just a passive backdrop to human behavior and social action, but it's constantly produced and remade within complex relations of culture, power, and difference. I was starting to shift my energy and to pay a lot more attention to the connections between physical space, digital space, and then the space in which they meet, right? And the space in what is created, in that hybrid moment. I really became fascinated with that. And gaming to me is like the epitome of that, of this digital creation influenced by real life things. And then we have to interact and engage with that, right? Because I'm sure there was no malintent when they made Battlefield 1. There was no malintent, when they gave us the experience of Lee Everett. There's no malintent, with any of these experiences, right? But if we go back then to the quote, here they are reproducing and reimagining for us some kind of reality that a lot of times is incongruent with the realities that we know it, that minoritized and vulnerable populations in which we know it. So there's this remixing of culture and there's this repackaging, but there is no repackaging and remixing whenever the social hierarchies are still intact and still in place. So I remember being early on saying, wow, I think gaming is rooted in white supremacy. And they're like, what are you talking about? No way. It was hard to really articulate that at the time. We didn't have Ruah Benjamin's work at the time. We didn't have, Sophia Noble's algorithms of oppression. So I was trying to make these conversations and say these things too early before we had these other mainstream kinds of examples. But I often say that gaming, I love using the phrase that gaming is like the canary in the coal mine. Remember, I'm from Kentucky. I use a lot of coal mine references. So sorry, I'm a coal country girl. So gaming is really like the canary, like in the coal mine, because if we would have paid attention to the things that were happening inside the gaming space, it was foretelling the things to come in tech. Let me give you another example. I don't know if I may not have it in here. I don't, but I'll go to this screen in just a second. The Kinect. Do you all remember the Kinect? Microsoft's Kinect. You remember that was the camera before cameras were popping. Everybody's got like a camera now, but basically it was the camera, and their catchphrase was like, "Your body is the controller." So it was a really beautiful tool, a really beautiful technology of where, what I loved about it was the accessibility of it, that it freed your hands, from the controller. Because I did a lot of work, like with deaf gamers, and, deaf gamers, deaf folks sign, they use their hands. And so when you put a controller in their hands, that takes away like their mode of communication, right? And to me, that's like a violent act. So I'm like, we needed something. So I love the Kinect for those purposes. But also during that time, so many people talked about how the Kinect would not read and render darker bodies. It couldn't see darker skinned folks. It couldn't see fat folks. It couldn't see, people who were like too tall, because it was one of those things that were created with a particular demographic in mind. When they did the prototypes and the beta testing, they were beta testing with people, who are in the tech world, and we got a sense of what that demographic is, right? The cis heterosexual white dudes is about probably 5'9", 190 pounds, 180 pounds, right? And then there was no thinking about people who were outside of that range. But this is very common, right? There was nothing new about that. And so, when folks, were trying to say, hey, something's going wrong, people were like, oh, no, it's not. You don't have enough lighting. You don't have enough space. They put it on the individual to try to make sense of like this structural issue, right? Now, Kishonna, why is this a problem? Why do we care about the Kinect? The Kinect is an obsolete technology. The Kinect is not an obsolete technology. The Kinect, the technology that's inside the Kinect is in everything that we do now, right? I don't think people realize, the Kinect, I feel like it was still a beta test when they deployed it and when we got it, because I'm thinking about conversations related to like, facial recognition technology, the bias in that. Especially the racial bias that's inherent in that. We think about Project Greenlight, like in Detroit, Project Greenlight, basically it's the city that has, Detroit turned its city over to tech surveillance, right? But we know that these technologies are not able to distinguish, Jerome from Jamal. It can't tell Muhammad from Abdul. It can't tell Jose from Martinez. It cannot differentiate. And so people were blowing the whistle saying, I don't think that these folks know, black and brown people apart. They see a wide nose and some full lips and some high cheekbones and a distinguished brow, and then they think we all look alike. And nobody paid attention, to what folks were saying, back then. And it started, a lot of those conversations started with the Kinect. But because it was in a gaming environment, people just overlooked it. They ignored it. And then they just thought it was like, oh, gaming is being so innovative. But here, this technology is like kind of seeping into everything, and it was unchecked. And so nobody really talked about it. So I often say that, if we really were to pay attention to a lot of the things that were happening in the gaming space, we could have been ready for some of these other conversations, that were coming about. I don't know for time. I'm just talking away. It is going on 8 o'clock. Somebody just wave your hands if you need me to stop. Okay. I'm just going to keep going until you wave your hands. Okay. This other example here that's on your screen right now. If we go back to that conversation that I was saying, that I'm really fascinated with that hybrid space of where the physical meets the digital, or cyber, virtual, whatever you want to call it, right? I'm really fascinated in that space. Pokemon Go is really like the epitome of a lot of the work that I'm doing right now and what I'm really invested in. So when I was in Chicago, I spent a lot of years in Chicago. I was at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And I had some students who were interested in Pokemon Go. Pokemon Go was, pretty new around the time, so for Pokemon Go is like geolocation kind of game. If you've got like a mobile device, or, then you play it, and, it's like the map, you have raids and stuff, and you're just walking around, and then you see people doing that. They're in Pokemon Go. I just totally destroyed. I'm sorry for real Pokemon Go fans. I'm so sorry. It's a great space. I love it. So I was working with some libraries on the south side of Chicago, and these young folks were interested in Pokemon Go. And so they said, hey, this fest is happening. I was pre-COVID, this fest is happening. You should come with us. I was like, okay. And so they were going to teach me how to play this game. Of course, we know about the anti-Blackness in the city of Chicago. So it was a group of Black boys. They tried to get in. They were turned away, because of all the narratives around, of course, Black folks in Chicago, right? Whether warranted or not warranted, that's not I'm not pressed about that. I'm just concerned about, the oppressive structure in which most of these cities reside in. They really are rooted in before I finish that sentence, let me finish telling you what happened. Okay, so they wouldn't let them in. So in my mind, I said, we don't need this Pokemon Go Fest, because from what y'all told me about this game, if we have a phone and some internet connection, we could play this game anywhere. And that's what was in my mind, right? So I was like, okay, well, let's go play Pokemon Go, south side of Chicago. Oh boy, couldn't I was so wrong. The left side of your map was the map that was generated. It was one stop. It looks like two on your map. It was just one stop. Now, keep in mind, I was just up on the north side of the city. If anybody's ever been to Chicago, it's like where the Bean is, like the touristy kind of areas, right? There were Pokego stops everywhere. And this is the map that I have out here. This is several years old. About 4 or 5 years old now. So there's a lot more stops, at this point too. For both, there's a lot more stops. Things are better. But when I pulled up this map for down on the south side in Inglewood, we were in Inglewood, and I was like, I was really shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, where are the stops, y'all? And so in my mind, I'm like, we weren't that far from this stop. So, because we were at the library, we were doing a lot of the work that I was doing was at the public libraries. So we went over to the stop, and y'all, oh my gosh. So it was a statue. Y'all know what kind of statue it was. It was a Confederate statue. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like things went from bad to worse. I was like, okay, we got kicked out of the Pokemon Go Fest. We came down here. There were no stops. The one stop that we did have was a Confederate general. Now I'm like, why are you sitting here in the city of Chicago? Go on back to Stone Mountain, Georgia, sir. Why are you here? And I was just like, I was just so embarrassed in front of these kids. And I was like, okay. I was like, we did the stop. We did the thing that we could do at the stop. But then we went back to the library, and I was like, let me search the internet real quick. They went to play Fortnite. This was when Fortnite was still on mobile devices. I don't think it's on there anymore. But anyway, they went back to play so I could go do like a little research to figure out what was going on. Because also our connectivity was an issue. So I had to look up a few things. I was like, because in my mind, I was thinking about the north side of the city. Chicago touts itself as like one of the most wired cities in the world. For the north side of the city. On the south side of the city, the only hotspot was that blue dot on your left side of your map. And that was outside of where we were. This other map in the middle, that's the map of like the library location. So there will be kids, especially during the summer, kids will like meet up, because a lot of them didn't have internet at home. They needed something to do. And, Chicago had divested in all the programming, social services, summer school, camps, after school things. There was a complete divestment. But the libraries actually, had still, they exist and they're still doing pretty good, programming for like the youth. So I wanted to be a part, to help and support. So that's the reason I was there. But what I found out was that, because there was no internet, we couldn't really participate, but since there wasn't any stops, we couldn't participate either. Now, I went to the Niantic website and I found that in order to get a stop, because I'm like, surely this is fixable. This is a tech problem. There's a tech solution, right? So I was like, let me contact Niantic and let me figure out what we could do. So on the website, there were 3 conditions in order to get a Pokemon Go stop, right? It had to be a landmark of something significant, right? And I was like, check. Because it's Chicago. There's so much history. There's so much Black history. There's so much food history, so much music history. There's all kinds of like history there. So I'm like, we've got this, right? And even in the neighborhood that we were in, I'll tell you that in a second. Second part, okay, so it had to be an area of significance. The second point, it had to have sidewalks. So I'm like, okay, it's a city, we got sidewalks, right? It's not like a rural area where we're just walking on the streets and dirt roads, right? But then that third one was that it had to be an area that was deemed safe. And so we know the narratives of Chicago. We know the narratives of the South Side of Chicago. There was not going to be anywhere on the South Side that was going to be deemed safe because they used hotspot, crime maps, to determine safety of an area. So that areas were just not deemed safe. But I was like, surely there is something that we can do. So that really turned into, I'm gonna speed up here because I know I am running out of time. I don't want to keep you all forever. I do want to open up Q&A so y'all can ask questions. But this turned into like this project that I wanted to do. But I realized that traditional models, going back to the methods piece, I promise going to come full circle. Everything will come full circle eventually. The models that I had for doing this kind of research didn't really fit and didn't really exist, right? I know we had like participatory models, we had community-based research, but I really wanted to build something with the community because I thought it was very significant. And another piece of what was so important was because, the brick and mortar, the institution of the library, was very significant and important because without the library, none of that programming would exist, right? So that was significant. But also, when we walked to that statue, there was a group of women who were invested in our safety to make sure that we made it there and made it back, because there's gun violence. I'm not trying to act like that it's not, right? But there's this group, Mask, Mothers and Men Against Senseless Killing. So they would just occupy street corners just to make sure that kids could go from, one block to the other. And so they would have checkpoints. They would be like, okay, all right, Caden is right here. He's heading north. And then, somebody will be up there say, we got him. He's going into the store now. So there was just this overwatch of mothers and men of these folks who were invested in the protection and safety of these young folks in Chicago. And it doesn't get talked about enough, right? But I also that's part of that physical infrastructure, not only the physical infrastructure yes matters and it's very important, but if there are no people and no bodies to ensure the safety of young folks, then things just also don't happen. And so this was one of those things where I didn't realize it would be significant to me just studying Pokemon Go and gaming in the built environment. I didn't realize how significant they were going to be because without them then a lot of the work just doesn't really exist. And here is, there's a statement from one of the mothers who was there. She said, I'm just a mother. I used to think my greatest accomplishment was raising 2 happy, healthy children in Chicago, where so many other mothers are denied that right. Then I sat in a lawn chair on a street corner and extended the love I have for my kids to someone else's. I've been enriched and deeply fulfilled by all of my children. I hope that one day you get to experience the same level of purpose that I have. And I thought, whenever I talked to these women, these was such one of the most powerful things. But I'm like, they are a part of, this hybrid infrastructure, to make sense of, what's happening inside these gaming spaces, because without them, the gaming doesn't exist. Now I'm going to wind down a little bit. A lot of this, I was going to close by talking about how all those things influence, the development of this concept that I call the intersectional game design. Because I often get asked by people, okay, well, you talk to us about all the problems, but how can we implement it, right? So there are these 4 things that I think are really important if we're thinking about creating and making and doing. Authentic experiences, who are you creating for? And I think we all have to talk about audience. If we're making and creating, if you're a content creator, if you're a streamer, if you're making TikToks, I think you need to engage in who your audience is, but also who your audience is not, and who gets left out of conversations and who is not a part, who might not get it, right? And also the information that needs, the background information that you would have to provide in order to get somebody up into the point where they could understand the content that you're creating. But also with aesthetics. We think about place, time, and space. We think about bodily aesthetics. We think about the sound and sonic experience. We think about the haptic experience, the things that we can touch and see and feel. All of these aesthetics matter. And I was really moved, not in a great way, by these karma scales in games, the good and bad option. They painted it as it's black and white. Okay, you choose the good option and then you're good, or the bad option and you're bad. But I'm the world is a little more complex than that, so those bother me a lot. Accessibility. Can everybody play the game? And if everybody can't play the game, then explain to us why. I think that's a very important and significant thing that I think, a gaming company should talk about. But also infrastructure matters. Can we access the things equitably? And I think my experience there with Pokemon Go and with the mass group, and also with the libraries and, all that stuff really made me think about how the public infrastructure, the physical space still very much matters to our digital experiences. So for that Pokemon Go game, right? So here you have an overlay of a digital overlay onto a physical environment, and we're completely ignoring, the legacies of Jim Crow. We're ignoring the legacies of like redlining that influence how we can interact and how we can play. And I think these things are very significant and very important to making and doing. These are just a few examples. So these are like intersectional, like aesthetics. I think NBA 2K has done the best job, I think, at giving us blackness, brownness, biracialness, like with hairstyles and swag and moves and dance. I really think that they're doing like a fantastic job, depicting all that stuff. I hated this right here. And this is one of those decisions that you make where you turn yourself in or you sacrifice the tribe. I was so mad. I'm like, what in the genocide is going on right now? Like I stopped that game right there. Some cute games that's going on. I always like to provide like cute games that I think are done well. Far Cry New Dawn, I like them, but also they were the villain, so black brown women are still like the villain in a lot of these games. You have Monstrous Mothers, where we're still depicting women in very, problematic ways. Mafia 3 was a beautiful game. It took us to like post-Vietnam, South, Louisiana, New Orleans kind of world. The soundtrack is beautiful. It opens with that Jimi Hendrix, by the Watchtower. Dun, 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 dun. It was so dope. It was so amazing. I know I'm winding down. Okay. The Veil. Yeah, go ahead and QR code this one. The Veil is a game that was written by a team of, the team is blind, they got low vision folks. And so they created this game that was like, okay, what if you can't see? How do you play video games? And they gave us that. And I think it's one of the most dynamic, beautiful experiences that you could experience. And I think what it does is it forces us to think deeply and differently about what a game can be and what a game should be. And I think it's really powerful. Let's see. And of course, Momo Pixel is one of the best things that has ever been created. Y'all should play Hair Na because this game is beautiful. Hair Na is the game where basically she got tired of people touching her hair and petting her. And so she made this game to be like, okay, stop touching me. But I love this game too, because it makes us talk a lot about agency and consent and body politics, hair politics, and traveling while black, right? So, I think the game gives us like a lot of those conversations that I think it's important to have. Okay, so that's me. I finally ended. I'm so sorry. I know I hope I have not gone over time. I'm so sorry.
You're all good, Kishonna. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. A round of applause, everybody. We'll open it up to questions from our live audience and our virtual audience. I enjoy all your talk, but the Pokemon Go example really speaks to me. I mean, the way that there's these lack of spaces and availability of spaces. And it's so interesting how you talk about the Niantic wants there to be these safe objects or safe places you can go to, and yet the only safe place you could go to, I use that in quotation marks, you can't see me, is a Confederate general, right? And what could be more unsafe to the Black body than the representation of protecting an institution of slavery, right? And that's where you have to go.
Yeah.
And I'd love to talk to you further at some other point. The project Smith and I are working on deals with gaming spaces in Los Angeles and the way that there's a differentiation between white suburban gaming spaces and minoritized neighborhood gaming spaces, and how those are a historic trend dealing with segregation, highway construction, and racialized policies in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and that was some of my issue and some of my problem, even with like the GTA franchise. I love Grand Theft Auto, but you all recognize different parts of the city because you all are you're there in proximity, you live there. But one of the things that was just so incongruent for me was that there was never any discussion of how we got there. In San Andreas, if you all remember GTA San Andreas, and I hope I'm answering your questions right. I was trying to listen to you and answer some of the folks in the chat. So, but I wanted to answer this way. Feel free to ask your question again, after I said this. San Andreas opened up talking about like the overarching powers of policing, right? Tenpenny, you all remember the character that Samuel L. Jackson was? Basically, our character CJ, he gets out of jail, but he's basically forced back into this life of crime. And so here there's like this structural problem, this structural element of like the track, right? This rotating loop of criminal justice surveillance that is inflicted down upon, Black and brown bodies in particular, right? There's never any, so they gave us like that little tidbit, but then, then we get like little flashes of it throughout the game. There's never any discussion of, how, racist immigration policy influences where people live, how, the constructions of the highway influence like the creation of like the ghettos and the hoods and the barrios. There was never any discussion of like, the corrupt, politicians, who have like influenced like the dynamics, with the city and the people like in the city, right? And so we're just left to just assume that this is like the pathological reality for Black and brown folks in LA, right? And I feel like that is doing us like a huge disservice, because so many people who interact with games like that, I'm thinking about like the work of Lisa Nakamura, like it's like a racial tour. It's like this commodified ghetto cool. We can just go ride through the hood for a little while, but then we can turn the game off and we can go back to our suburbs, right? And so there was just something that was just so intrusive and so kind of like disturbing, like the flippant ways in which people would play these ghettoized like experiences of trying on some cultures and trying on these realities and doing drive-bys in the hood, right? I was also really fascinated, like just to see the different cultural ways, like the different ways that different cultures like interacted with that game. A lot of us, especially those of us who are like from neighborhoods like this, we're not going through and like destroying our own neighborhoods. Like so many people, I remember there was this experience, and there were these white dudes. They loved coming to the hood and running people over and, like blowing up, the Black and brown women who were the sex workers, who were the streetwalkers, like on the in the game. And the ways that they would just play that game and just decimate the bodies of like Black and brown folks never sat well with me, right? The ways that they would use, a Black and brown women's bodies, like to generate their health and then discard them, like they were trash. They would use them, in sexual ways, and, their health would go up, and then they would kill them and get their money back, right? So there was always just something like just so sinister in how like people played that game. But as much as I'm bothered with them, I'm very bothered with the gaming industry, who even gave us those mechanical, who created the game in that way and gave us like the mechanics and the tools for the game to be played in that way, right? So a lot of people were like, well, we created the game, but we didn't know that's how people would play. And that didn't sit well with me. But it also goes to like this larger conversation that I have. I'm so sorry, I'm going to stop talking. Oh my gosh, I'm going to stop talking in a second. But I spent a lot of time doing, no, this is not me now. I don't work with the police now. Back in the days, remember criminal justice, I worked with the police, and the time when I thought police could be reformed, right? And so I would do their, I would go through the simulations that they would have. There was a shoot, no shoot simulation, where all police, when they go through the academy, they go through this shoot, no shoot simulation. It's basically to prepare your mind to figure out, what's happening in your environment, to figure out if you need to, draw your weapon and shoot or not. Every scenario that I saw the officers go through, they were all shoot scenarios. And in my mind, I'm like, why would you subject them, every single trainee, to a shooting possibility of getting them hyper aware, getting the adrenaline and the cortisol and the stress of their body, getting them activated to do violence when they go out into the street? And the commander that was there, he was like, well, they got to get ready. If you got to stay ready and get ready, something, whatever, you stay ready and get, whatever he said. I was like, are you serious right now? There was another simulation that I did. I'm really invested in this conversation because, you know, policing, law enforcement, you know, military, they have a really interesting relationship with the gaming companies, right? You know, and I think that's no secret. We know that, you know, that gaming, that a lot of games are made with military personnel, you know, so that's no secret. But there was this other simulation that I did. The simulation was providing training for, you know, police departments to help them with de-escalation and diffusing stressful situations. They told, whenever I did it, it was a cool simulation. You know, it made you have to use words and think about it. But the people who ran the training, they told me, they said, every time a police officer goes through this training, this simulation, they just pull out their gun and they start shooting people just to see if they can. And then they have to reset the simulation. They said, actually, officer, you don't need your weapon for this simulation. Please put that down. You're talking. And in my mind, I'm like, why did you even create this experience with the gun? Right? Because they're already activated, you know, to be like, oh, this is my power and this is my duty to shoot. I'm like, so why would y'all even design that in there? I'm like, take the gun out. Like, so what are they going to say and what are they going to do in these situations? Right. So I'm gonna stop there because I don't know where I'm going, but the question that you asked made me compelled to answer it in that way.
No, I think that's a great answer. And we had a question from one of our students. Adele, did you want to ask that question yourself or would you prefer if I did?
I could just say it. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so I was curious about so I watched a little bit of the Battlefield 1 clip that you had shown, and initially how you felt the opening was impactful, but as it kept going, as the character, you as a player, as Black men kept dying without getting regenerated and the tombstones are showing. At what point is it too much, like you said, an overconception of Black death? And how would you yourself retell this opening if you can talk about that with a lot of time? But yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that question. Oh my gosh. You know, in all the years, you know, since I've been engaging with that game and having these conversations, I never once thought about how I would reconceptualize that. I got to get a good answer for it. I don't have one right now, and also I don't know how I would do it. I don't think I would be the one that could imagine a world or a scenario of where military violence was ever even done well, right? Because I have even though I play shooters, I have a huge issue with the military industrial complex, you know? So I don't even know if that was an experience that I would want to engage in that kind of interactive way. I wish it was more so do you all know the experience I Am a Man VR? If you all can, if anybody has the chance, can you look up I Am a Man VR and like drop a link in there so people can see that experience? I would probably make it in this way. And in this way of where we showed the lives and the humanity of, you know, these folks who volunteered their lives, you know, to serve their country. And, you know, and they were doing it in beautiful and honorable ways, right? And so I think like more of like a museum kind of experience where maybe we hear some narration of, you know, who these men were, you know, where they're from, you know, how they felt about being you know, like second-class citizens in their own country, and you know, not feeling their full humanity, but still signing up to go fight. Why they, you know, so I think I would do it in a way that actually humanized them and humanized the experience of them, as opposed to seeing them engage in any kind of fighting or any kind of like, you know, military violence in any way. Because I think if you really want to honor somebody's life, you don't show their death, you know. And I guess that's what I wish that the game could give us. And so I guess that's how I would design it. Yeah. Thank you for asking that.
We have other questions.
We got a few in the audience right here.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. We're going to turn the mic and hopefully shout louder.
Hi, I was gonna ask, do you know of any games that are out or have come out in the past that have like people of color in a hero type of a way, like not just like a part of the cast, but they're like the actual like hero in the game, and then like how would you, if you had the choice, like, or if you had the power to create a video game for yourself, like what kind of like how would you like detail that out? Like how, like what would you,
Yeah.
what would be your dream game to create?
Oh gosh. Thank you for asking that. Oh my gosh, y'all got some good questions. I love speculative fiction. I like spaces that allow us to reimagine worlds and reimagine possibilities. I love, let me give you this example. Some of my future work, I'm working on this book called Black Game Studies. And I'm talking a lot about like Black cyber feminism, like in there. And I wrote an essay on Black cyber feminism like back in 2012 or 2013. I think I wrote it too soon. I wrote it too early because I was able to write about the why and the how, like in this high, this theoretical sense. But I didn't really have like the what to like latch onto until recently. So I watched Lovecraft Country. Did y'all watch Lovecraft Country? I like weird stuff. So it's just weird, it's sadly it features, Jonathan Majors in really insignificant ways. So so that's problematic. But if you all, are still in a space where you can engage, content despite, the creators being trash. I would urge you all like to watch it because it's really beautiful. There's a character in there, Hippolyta. She basically goes on this quest to the future and these future worlds and these possibilities. And she attains and amasses all this knowledge from these different entities and these different goddesses and these different experiences. And then so like she goes to the future, and then she backtracks back to her present. And then she comes back, and all this power, all this knowledge that she has, and the thing that she does when she comes back, she saves her child. The care that she has for children was just so beautiful. And I thought that was like such a powerful example. I mean, I think this example also, that's like the example that also was going to connect the threads from the other work that I'm working on, the work with Pokemon Go and Mask, Mothers and Men Against Senseless Killing, about how, the protection of, queer and trans youth, especially like in my state that I'm especially in Kentucky right now, I think, that's like really like core. And so, and I think that's the example. So if I were to like write or design, it would be reimagining what the world could look like right now. I was just in a Twitter thread. I know we gotta go. I'm so sorry. I was just like kind of like in a Twitter argument. We're not really arguing. I don't argue anymore. But I was in this Twitter kerfuffle with somebody, and I was really sad that so many people can't imagine a world without the police, and so I think that we need better examples, because think about all the propaganda that we have in media right now. We really are so dependent and codependent on like policing that people can't even imagine what it looks like if they didn't exist, right? And so I think we need more materials. I would actually love to make a game about, somebody gets in trouble, who do you call? What do you do? And just show people. I think people need these mediated examples to really see, from the abolitionist work, of like what it looks like and how you can reimagine, like communities of care and protection that don't have, state sanctioned violence like connected to them. So I think that's like the biggest thing that I would talk about and that I would write about, is just help people reimagine a world without the, that state sanctioned violence. Yeah.
Awesome. We have another question, Tomas, one of my students. You're gonna have to yell, so.
We're talking about representation in video games, and what I was thinking, because of all the examples given are video games which take place within Earth, so that they have to be representative of the characters from over Earth nationalities. But a lot of video games take place in fantasy worlds or fiction worlds, and so they claim to not have to represent certain groups, yet what ends up happening in like games like The Witcher, Elder Scrolls, Lord of the Rings, all the faces tend to be white, and there tends to be a lack of brown faces. And the defenses, since they're not representing the real world, they don't have to represent those groups. And so I guess the question is like, how does digital representation fit into into these games which don't really represent Earth, and how do we still integrate, brown faces, and because it's still representation, just out of the inevitability of having to design a character with skin color. How do we reconcile with that and work to make fantasy more representative?
I struggle with this one, right? Because I grew up, in a space where I didn't see myself in media, you know? Then we start seeing it in we had a lot of it like in the 90s, but then it kind of went away, like in the 2000s. And I was like, where did all the diversity go? And then I also struggle because I'm like, I got to give you an example. And then you'll know where I'm coming from with this. I was one of the people who asked for more diversity in games, right? Just like we asked for more diversity, like in media, we wanted more diversity from like our Oscar winners and all that kind of stuff, right? I was one of those people. When I got, oh my gosh, Call of Duty. I play Call of Duty a lot. Don't judge me. I love it. It's a wonderful game. I was able to play with a Black woman a couple years ago, Sydney. A lot of you all remember, beautiful dark-skinned woman. I was really excited to play her. I was also excited to play Farah, Middle Eastern woman. She wears a hijab. I was so excited to be able to play, these Black and brown women. I didn't like the amount of violence that was done to them in the game. I hated when she died. And I hated, there's something, it just did something to me just to see her lying on the ground, just over and over and over again. And I'm like, when I asked for more diversity, I think I failed to account for the fact that they would be subject to the violence in gaming, right? All the violence that's associated like within gaming. So I think that I had to start to ask a different question. Instead of giving me like more diversity in these trash games that we got, like, can you give us better games in general, right? Let's reimagine, I think about like in the fantasy space, there's a lot of beauty in the fantasy space, a lot of beauty in, the RPG space, right? There's a lot of beauty because they have, the possibilities to imagine different worlds. And I guess I just wish that we had that in a lot of the AAA space, a lot of the AAA games, because a lot of what I do, is in the AAA space, but I'm only there because a lot of the co-narrators or participants, you might call them participants in the study, they take me to those spaces because that's what they mostly play. So a lot of times it just seems like, like I'm in a space of like, some of the grossest misconceptions of, women and folks of color, right? But yes, I want more diversity. Yes, I want to see more of us in those spaces, but I want to see us in spaces that are conceived differently. Don't just put us in a military shooter. Like, let's disrupt the military industrial complex. Let's disrupt that, right? And let's reimagine like different kinds of worlds. So like the example that I gave you, like, somebody had just put in the chat, like Watch Dogs 2. Thank you, Eugene. I think you, Shido. I think you gave Bruno, my bad. Bruno gave us like Detroit. There are really some like beautiful, beautiful iterations of what gaming can be. And I guess I wish we just had more of that. Less Call of Duty, more Detroit Become Human. Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
All right. We don't want to take advantage of your time, Dr. Gray. But if there are one or two more questions, I think we have a couple of minutes left here in the audience or out there in Zoom land. There are still 75 people here, so I'm assuming you all have something to say, maybe. But if you don't,
you all are beautiful. I'm trying to say thank you to everybody. I probably can't say thank you to everybody, but thank you all so much. Y'all are amazing. And really have me out next. Like, I want to come out there and hang out with y'all. I really tried to be out there physically this time. It just didn't work out. I'm so sorry. But hopefully I want to come out there and hang with y'all.
No, we would love to actually have you in our For Real space. And I think our students would love to have you back. This conversation was awesome. And one of the ones that had probably our largest audience thus far. So
that's awesome. Let the dean know in case the dean wants to hire me.